Welcome everybody to today's webinar. As you see, we have the advertisement for next time as well, but I will go to our introduction here for today. So what we're going to talk about today are the learning hubs, which is our interpretation of what online learning can look like for students. So we would like to tell you about our project of the learning hubs in our childhood team. We will be talking about what we offer to the students in these learning hubs. And we have three speakers today. Myself, I'm Ivana Lesna-Lisztiakova. I'm a senior lecturer in childhood, and my background is in special educational needs and disability and inclusive practice, and a little bit of creative methods in learning. So that's maybe my contribution. We'll talk about that later. And I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Lecluse. I am senior lecturer in the department, and I am the program leader, course leader of the Childhood Roots. I have been at the university for quite a while, and in that sense have gone through many reiterations of programs and have gone through the process of validation, revalidation several times, and that's where my part in the learning hubs comes into as part of a validation. But I'll talk a bit about that later as well.
Good afternoon. So I'm Carolyn. I'm also a lecturer within the Childhood Studies team. I will just give anyone a heads up. If anyone's wearing headphones, my dog is asleep underneath my chair at the moment. So please forgive me if he does bark and startle anyone. But I have worked in the childhood team for the last 3 years now. My background is a bit different to Ivana's. So I originally started in childhood studies, and I have a massive interest within sociology.
Great, thank you. So before we tell you things, we would like to hear a little bit from you. So we have this experiment here with the poll. We would like to know if there are any things that you feel that your students are still struggling with, that you feel that you would be so happy if they finally got a grip on these areas. So is there an area like that? Please vote in the poll. And if there's some other area, then you can type that in the chat. You can pick the other option and just type the area, the skill area that you feel that your students need help with in the chat. That will be really helpful. So we have areas like referencing, academic writing, time management, and then additional employability skills such as building their CV, or maybe getting ready for interviews, or different employability areas that we could potentially support them with. So I don't know how long we let it run, but at some point we will see the results. And there we go. You should be able to see the results now. Right, so quite a balanced need across all those 4 areas that we have noticed that our students struggle with, and that we would really like to support them as well. So thank you everybody for voting and for giving us a really good overview of what our students might need. Right, and that's exactly what we were thinking, and we were trying to figure out how we could do that. So with saying this, the aim of this webinar is to introduce our, I would call it an experimental solution to student engagement in these sort of skill building areas. So we identified academic, transferable, and employability skills as being really important, along with managing life and university, finding a good balance, staying resilient, and supporting their mental health and well-being. So these were the things that we tried to offer in our learning hubs, and we would like to talk about it in this webinar. But before we do that, could you just write down, just for yourself, and if you want, you can share that in the chat, but you don't have to, what is your aim what would you like to gain from being here today? Why did you join? Yeah, so we're happy if you share, and if you don't feel like sharing that with us, that's okay, but write it down for yourself. And then in the end, we'll have a look at it. And if we haven't fulfilled your aim, then hopefully we can answer some questions in the Q&A at the end. Perfect. Thank you. So Wendy will take over now.
So within our, within the institution in the past years, with the changes that we've had to, or the move in education and learning that we've had to become accustomed to very quickly, there's been a lot of conversation about online learning, blended learning, and in that conversation, very often the word learning hub was block learning, but then the learning hubs was mentioned. And but actually also when we bound that word around, it's actually quite a vague term, because what does it mean? And before we kind of dive into showing you what it is we mean with our learning hubs, we just wanted to give you an example of what kind of thinking is required and is at the basis of the learning hubs. So I'm sure that we all are very accustomed and familiar with with making students engage with content, and very often in our more traditional way, it is content is being given in a rather passive way. So for example, in this example, when we want to have a conversation about the difference between descriptive writing and critical writing, we could, and I have in the past, this is a list that I'm quite familiar with, we could say, well, these are the differences. Descriptive writing is this, and critical writing is this, and these are the characteristics. When what is actually the underpinning of the learning hubs does require a change, a shift in mindset, and a shift in how we think about how we want students to engage with the content. And rather instead of in a passive way, we are thinking of active ways of making students work with that same type of content. And so on the right hand side, what you can see is an activity, a drag and drop activity, where students are actually being exposed to exactly the same content as the left hand side, the columns, but are having to actively allocate the characteristics to the right column, either critical writing and descriptive writing. So that's the type of activities we are talking about and that we will be working with. But so it's just so you have some kind of idea and something to, a peg to hang your thoughts onto. So I hope this example is useful. You can also see that it really requires a different way of thinking about how we, the type of activities we give to our students. So what are our learning hubs, or the learning hubs? The term is being used across the university, but actually, what we are presenting is how we have interpreted that. So it is an online platform available to all students, where there is where there's an opportunity for that extended learning, where there is more stuff than what we what we offer in our sessions, but also it means that it is a platform where students can dip in and out of, and is there for them at always at their disposal. It's at this moment it is a resource pool of interactive online activities, and the emphasis is very much on interactive. The students are active learners in this process and are kind of working their way through these resources. Because what the resource pool does, it offers options. So it offers options in terms of what students engage with, but also in which way they do that. Importantly as well, there is this developmental trajectory. One of the issues issues or realities we were faced with when we were thinking about how we were going to organize block learning was the idea that block modules really are these siloed elements, and we felt that we needed some overarching content or provision that would help us and help the students in linking these different blocks together and provide a trajectory throughout the year. Something that was quite naturally present within a semesterized system. All of a sudden, we've had to find a way to make it, to mimic this, in combination with the block learning. The students earn certificates, so there is, there's very much a motivational element to it. However, we very much recognize all the resources that are available already within the university. So there's a lot of use of the learning services provision, the Future Me program of the our careers team, and also the skills builder, which is something our careers team works with. And actually, so what it ends up being is a platform, an opportunity for a lot of learning for the students, extended learning, while also and building skills, while trying to be as efficient as possible with tutor time, and rather than having to repeat how to reference, how to write in different ways, in different blocks, there is actually a space where students can go to whenever they need it, or where tutors can point students to when it is needed. So it is also an efficiency measure for tutor time, but also very much so it allows tutors to share their good practice, because we all contribute to the learning hubs. So I might have a really good activity that I've done in class, and maybe I've ran a couple of years already. Well, as a team, we think about, so how can we turn that into a learning hub activity? Other people contribute other elements as well. So it becomes this space of also sharing good practice. And you can see it ticks a lot of boxes, and it's both from a student's perspective and from a tutor perspective. Next slide. So why, what was the motivation? And I think we've already highlighted some of these elements, but I think all of us know the feeling of feeling as if you are in repeat when a student says, but I don't really know what critical writing is. How does that work? Or a cohort says, we don't know what critical writing is. So we feel as tutors that we are teaching these skills over and over again. And actually, sometimes it just doesn't stick. The students can't get their heads around it, or don't engage with it, or think they don't know it already, but in fact, maybe they don't. We all are very familiar with the idea that, we point our students to the learning services, to the library, and say, there's so much there, please go and, and have a look. There's the LibGuides, there's all these materials and resources that you can use, please go. The engagement or getting students to engage can be quite tricky. So we were really thinking about, so how can we do this differently in combination with a need to create an overarching and a continuous delivering of these skills and this content on top of in combination with the block of teaching. So the learning hubs are informed by a range of pedagogical ideas, but it centers within an active constructivist learning pedagogy. The students are active learners and are doing active stuff while doing this learning, or as a means to really engage with materials and to take their learning in their own hands. We also, it very much is aimed at improving and enhancing students' self-efficacy for learning. So it provides this hub where they can go and they can decide what they are going to engage with. We also, looked into and the development is also informed by Redmond's and colleagues' online engagement framework for HE, where they really identified the key elements of online engagement. And these key elements are cognitive, emotional, behavioral, social, and collaborative engagement. And we try to incorporate these 5 elements within the learning hubs. And then obviously we want to motivate students. Obviously there needs to be some motivational element. And so through awards and certificates, also through promotion of specific learning hub activities within modules and linking it to assessments is how we try to motivate the students to engage and take their learning in their own hands in that sense. So how did we get here? Well, I think, and again, there's some repetition here of what we've said before, but we had, as a team, we felt that there was this persistent need of, providing students with sometimes very much the same, content, the same skills building, and this need for, these academic needs that our students clearly have. That in combination with the pedagogical shift within the university to blended learning, to block learning, meant that many of the courses, so did we, went through validation, which actually offered a real opportunity to rethink how we wanted to do stuff. And so what we did as a team, we sat together and, after really thinking about what are the core elements of our course, we had an opportunity to also think about, the surrounding stuff of how do we also give students, these additional skills which the learning hubs can give. And then those ideas got turned into active online learning activities, resulting in the learning hubs. This is, as Ivana said at the start, it's an experimental project. It is very much under development. We have a starting, we have a good set of activities already, but we have so many ideas to expand. So we've got some very exciting times ahead in terms of building this further. And as we mentioned before, the 3 people who are kind of pushing this project forward is very much Ivana, and we all have different elements that we are bringing. But so I think from my perspective and my motivation to really, put this in place was the idea that we needed some kind of learning trajectory of skills throughout a level, but also across the levels. And we really wanted to almost formalize or think about, provide a framework of how do we help our students develop from very much, guided learning towards, our independent learners, but with all the skills that go around it. And Ivana will, can now explain what, her biggest motivation of it.
That's a hard one, actually. I think my biggest motivation is that I like a new challenge. So I felt that, oh, great, I can develop some new skills by doing something online now, and by trying to put my ideas of creative learning that I would normally do in the classroom, maybe something arts-based or embodied learning, of how do I transfer this into an online environment? So I needed to almost distill the principles of, okay, what do I like? I really like if students can bring in how they feel about the topics. So in the online activities, I'm asking them questions about, identify in a poll how you feel about critical writing before I get them to do a task on critical writing. So that was kind of my motivation, transferring the creative learning into this new environment for me, and just learning for me as well. Caroline, what was it for you?
I think mainly because the past few years I've mainly focused on teaching final year students, and what I've particularly done in a lot of my modules is I've had a lot of external speakers come into the modules that reflect the taught content, and it became quite transparent. Actually, a lot of the students don't see the module in terms of the employment and the outside world. And what I really saw we need to do is kind of bridge this gap of a module that teaches theoretical content, actually where that sits and where they can go after university. So actually linking all the modules to some type of aspect of employability, whether that is they start learning to build a CV, or they start learning, basic conversation interview skills, or even the organizations they can go to. These have become very much embedded kind of moving forward. So for instance, previously I've had a speaker come in that worked within a children's home, and a lot of the students didn't actually realize that actually this was a way that they could go in terms of employment after university, or where to go in terms of how they could find out to get a placement there or to volunteer there. So actually the Learning Hub is bridging the next steps of after university and what happens next, but it will also allow them from the earliest stage to also start building their CV, to recognizing the things that they do that can enhance their CV practice. Because what many of us probably realize, we do many things in our days, but what we're not doing is keeping a record of evidence. So when we do go for interviews, when we do apply for jobs, that actually we've got this bank of examples that are already available to us. So employability is something that is really kind of key to really run through, but particularly for our final year students, a lot of them, when they start university, have this very clear idea of, I want to go from A to B, but actually many of them change their mind, or they're not quite sure of where to go. So having a good relationship with careers and bringing careers in, because that's another thing a lot of the students have come up with. Some of them didn't even realize we had a careers team, but actually having these aspects built into the Learning Hub will enable our students to have better progression after university, to be able to do writing a CV, to be able to write a covering letter, which will in turn make them more employable in the future.
So, when we started the idea, as a team, we sat together and literally threw a couple of questions in the group and went, okay, so what skills do we need our students to have? What elements would we, do we want to make sure are incorporated within the learning hubs, and which elements of that learning trajectory do we really want to put effort in and want to make sure that our students engage with? And we came up with a whole range of, almost too much information and that's where all the ideas come from. We've got so many ideas, but obviously the straightforward the elements of academic writing, referencing, came up quite quickly. Of we need to keep repeating. We need to give them repeated exposure to that, which the learning hubs do, because when we feel that students need a recap, then actually, in fact, we can send them back to the learning hubs rather than having to revisit that information. And we came up with 5 themes, which are, some are more relevant to certain levels of study than other levels. So we came up with university life, such as, as when students start at the university, knowledge of services, knowledge of time management, understanding their learning needs, being able to take opportunities, even thinking about, the social life associated with university life. So, one of the themes was university life, which is very much linked to level 4. Obviously, we had academic skills that we really wanted to embed very strongly within the learning hubs around literature searching, reading, writing, referencing, evaluating, critical thinking, but also proofreading, which is something that our students seem to be somewhat oblivious of at most of the time, actually. So, we talked about academic skills. We then started thinking about transferable skills. So as students move from level 4 to level 5, what are the skills that we need to make them aware of, that actually you've learned that in level 4, you need it in level 5 and in level 6. These are skills that you are building. Obviously academic skills are such, but we were thinking about sort of reflective skills, taking up responsibility, taking opportunities, critical thinking, communication and presentation. So the learning hubs allow us to introduce some of these skills and then build upon them, so they might, at the end of level 4, some students might get a certain activity around time management is actually quite an early on one, but then in level 5 they get time management again, but maybe the next level up where we actually add some of the complexities. So that's how we were thinking about that's the learning trajectory in there as well. And then obviously as our students get to level 6, we start talking about employability. We all know that actually we should be talking about employability earlier on, a lot earlier on. And so those skills we also can build into the learning hubs, or as one of the elements, such as self-efficacy, finding opportunities, but also being self-aware, knowing their own skills, which then can in later years might develop further into writing a CV, doing interviews, preparing a statement, or applying for jobs. So a lot of the employability skills, while we might not, we won't talk about them maybe straight away in the beginning of level 4. We might start mentioning in, sometime in level 4, definitely in level 5, and very much so in level 6. For example, our level 4 students started off with the Future Me program very early on in their second block. And looked at those very first elements of Future Me, and will be guided through the Future Me program and certificate throughout their time with us. And then a fifth, a very important element was well-being. And we really, because we all know the struggles that students have, but we really wanted to work around resilience skills, reflection, confidence. So these are other elements that we have tried to build in, or are still building in. So that's a bit of an overview of the different elements. So if we now have a think about when we are in class and we are having to support our students for an assessment. So there's another poll. So have a think about, so what do you do when you support your students? Do you mainly focus on explaining the content and topic of the assignment? Or do you need to implement also seminars around how to write an essay? So more the academic skills around it, and in an almost repeated manner. So feel free to, tell us what you think. Okay. Aisha, what are the results? Yeah. So as we expect, obviously it is part of our job to support the students throughout their assessments. So, and how to format the assignment, or how to write an essay. But actually, this is one of those opportunities or situations where the learning hubs can also provide quite a bit of support. It doesn't mean that obviously you don't need to do it anymore, but it is this extra level of support that we can give our students. I'll pass over to Ivana now.
Great. So in this next section, I will try to show you very practically of what we did and what sort of activities we're offering at the moment. Our learning hubs run on Brightspace, and I will try to swap the windows in a bit to actually show you the pages. For practical reasons, we grouped those attributes or those areas that Wendy was talking about into these 4 blocks, for themes, for folders or something like that on our Learning Hub resource pool. So we have university, life, and well-being we put into one category. So, at the moment, we have these kinds of activities. So we have paraphrasing and avoiding plagiarism. We help students organize their resources. We try to help them get ready for academic writing. That's the activity I would like to show you later. There's obviously an activity about referencing. In transferable skills, we try to pull in existing resources from the future me, as well in setting goals, identifying strengths of the students for themselves that they can later work on and build into their, maybe identifying the needs, what they need to work on later on in building their skills. We went also into a little bit of project management and teaching them very transferable skills of building Gantt charts, which we encourage them to do then in their project planning for their dissertations. But obviously, if you go to work to any company, they will be happy if you are able to do that. And there was a question in the chat about certificates. So Brightspace offers the option to generate a certificate after you have completed certain activities. So these are just certificates that we created. So each of these activities generates a certificate for the student. So if they go through all the content and they do the kind of little assignment that's there, either a quiz or they need to upload a material or engage in a discussion board and so, the certificate is automatically generated for them. And so practically you need to make the PDF and say everything that the certificate will say. But for example, a little certificate of I know how to do a Gantt chart is a useful thing to have on your portfolio. In some of the resources, if there is an external certificate, like if we're using an external website that generates something, then obviously they can use that as well. But it pretty much says the name of the activity and what area it's under. So if it's a transferable skill, academic skill, and so on. In the employability skills, we were sending students to a lot of those activities that were going on at the university because we felt that it was really important to encourage their engagement with those activities. And we wanted to hear feedback from them. So we had Padlet discussions about what they experienced in these events, again, promoting that the idea of connecting in that online space and sharing the experience. For the university life, for example, we started with an activity where they had to identify in quizzes of if you have this problem, which service would you engage with? This is an overview of our ideal scenario of how we would like this to go next year when we have all of our students in block, because at the moment we still have a level 6 in semester model. So ideally, each student will go through an activity from each area in a block. So in week 1, you would go through university life and well-being. In week 2, academic skills. In week 3, transferable skills. In week 4, employability skills. And then repeat again in the next module, and so on and so on. The students will go through always building on a skill in each of the activities in each block. So this is what I find really useful. From the student perspective, they have their module, they have their sessions where they meet with the tutors either online or in face-to-face on-campus sessions. And then because we have this blended learning, we're offering online activities. So for the students in their block, in their module, they have a series of online activities, and the Learning Hub activity is part of that. From the tutor perspective, it's almost like maximizing the work, or making your life easier in the long run, I hope, So let's say that students have options of the modules that they attend, and maybe you have a presentation as the assessment. So why not use the same Learning Hub activity for several modules, because it's really useful. Or if everybody's writing an essay, then that teaching about essays can be done in that Learning Hub. So you don't have to create new and new activities for the same content, and they can be used across the modules. Right, so I'm going to try and swap here for share on our Brightspace. If people from other universities are watching us, then maybe you have a different platform, but similar tools are available also in Moodle or in other Blackboard, maybe, I'm not sure. Okay, so this is our resource pool in our learning hubs, where our learning hubs sit. This is a Brightspace that all of our students from all year groups and across different pathways or different routes that they have they are all here. So they all have access to it. So all of the tutors can send them to these activities. We have something that we call the resource pool. And in there, we have those folders for academic skills, transferable skills, employability skills, and university life and well-being. And each of them has then, each activity has its own folder. So I would like to show you this getting ready for academic writing activity. And this was my learning curve and how to work around Brightspace. So each activity starts with an opening page because, and maybe you have figured this out already, you can always link, or you can direct students to a direct link, but it needs to be a page. It can't be a folder. So the opening page is really useful if you want to use a direct link. Okay, so that's just a bit of a technicality. So getting ready for academic writing, this is the opening page that tells students what is waiting for them in that folder. Then they click through and there is an HTML page with a little video that introduces essay writing. And then here we have a little interactive component where they have to identify which writing tips they find most useful. Right? They were all kind of talked about in the video. And it's, again, so instead of just telling them, we're asking them to do something with that content. So they can mark 1 or 2 or 3, but actually they are reading all of them. So we're putting that in their mind that actually you may want to try these tips, but they can identify which ones they're already using. And it's just playing around with the settings so that they get it as the right answer. Okay. So after that, there's another one. So again, we're starting with identifying what they feel, where they are with their writing. Without knowing anything more, they can identify if they are the architect writer, the grant planner writer, the diver writer, the petrol writer. So they can check, and it's all correct because it doesn't matter. But then here, they can turn these flashcards that actually explain the different types of writers. So there's always the, again, so it's a little bit more interactive than just reading text. Right? Okay, then they have another one. Okay, this is my favorite. You can create these pictures where students can, or anybody can click on different parts of the picture, and then it reveals a little bit more of the text. That again tells you some tips for writing, what are the advantages and disadvantages of writing in these different places. So the level of how much the students engage with the content is really up to them. So the kind of the principle of the online learning is that flexibility of how much you want to read. You know, maybe you just need to flip through it quickly because you already know that, and that's fine. And then we have some diagrams, and we're signposting back to other online activities in the Learning Hub that we've had in the other folders. So if they haven't done it, they can go to mind maps and do another whole set of activities on the mind maps. We're just kind of signposting them to here. And then here are some tips of how to build an essay plan. This is actually a page that has got a lot of text, but some students still like to do that, and maybe they like to print it out. They like to have an overview that they can come back to. So it's good to have that combination of those different styles. Right, so always when it's possible, we put some visuals in, and then it ends with building your essay plan, and then you can get a certificate for this type of activity. I'm looking at the time, so I'm not going to show you another one, but I'm happy to share that with people later if you would like to. I'd like to see more of the activities that we have or more examples. I'm gonna go back to our presentation here, and I'll leave Carolyn to do the next slides.
Thanks, Ivana. So in setting up the Learning Hub, obviously we came across a number of challenges. One of the challenges will be up front is the development time and staff skills. So, I mean, Ivana, she spent considerable amount of time in setting these up, and we'll put our hands up. The initial setting up, development, the ideas, the brainstorming, it does take a considerable amount of time. But what you do get to claim back is once this is set up, it is good to run year after year after year. So the initial time, while it can be quite extensive to start with, there's a lot of playing around with Brightspace, and as many of us know, Brightspace does not have an undo button. So if it goes wrong, you have to redo it. It's one of those things where we can play around with the sandboxes, we can build things, we can transfer things. But the initial development of time is kind of crucial in this, that actually once you've got it set up, once you've got it running, this is something that can be implemented each and every year going forward. And it's something that we can continue to add to. And it may be something in the future that hopefully across the school, we can share ideas and share, pools of resources that we can actually have this kind of centralized hub where we can all draw on. So, we will be honest about the time front, but actually the longevity, when we think of how many times we have tutorials with students, how many times that we explain the processes of how to reference, how many times we explain, how to write an essay needs an introduction, actually in the long term, we gain a lot of this back because it's something we can, again, signpost, whether that be within a PAC session or whether it being with our students ourselves, we can signpost to these resources and enable students to take some self-ownership over their own work. And if they're saying they can't do this, have you accessed that section on the Learning Hub? Have you tried it? Have you engaged with it? And it's something that we can give back in line with the principles of PAC for the students to take that ownership over their own work. It's also in terms of student engagement as well. Obviously, with the high level students in their final year, actually it's a lot more tricky in terms of embedding the Learning Hub with them because this is something very new we've brought in. But embedding it into the level 4 students, this is now something that they don't know this wasn't here before. This is the case of this is their university journey. It's something there and it's something that's always going to be there. The other benefit with the Learning Hub is that actually it's embedded within the OLE time. So within most of our modules, we have our taught content time, but we also have a substantial amount of OLE time. By embedding elements, or again, of the Learning Hub in that OLE time, again, it allows you as a lecturer to claim a bit of your time back because you can signpost them to an activity which might take an hour, which will then hopefully then allow them to do better in their assessment or moving forward as well. But it's also much more engagement with the students because actually the principles of active learning and the way the Learning Hubs are set up and the activities, these are kind of the day-to-day interactions a lot of our students will have online anyway. So if we consider, the volume of social media usage now and the amount of social media platforms, we do find that actually a lot of these principles of the quizzes in terms of the activities are already embedded in there. But not only that, by actually creating these Learning Hubs, we are reaching out to students in terms of hitting the majority of students' learning needs, whether that be visual, auditory, it kind of hits the whole span within these. But actually, because as we said, this is kind of a test pilot to see, how this is running, what are the benefits, pitfalls within this. We are doing evaluation of the research project at the end of the year. we are going to be conducting focus groups with students in each year to actually get their feedback on terms of their understanding and engagement. And hopefully from this, we will be able to deliver kind of our findings from this in the CELT conference, I was about to say June next year, but we are in next year, June this year. We'll be able to give you a lot more information in terms of how the students have found it in terms of engagement, in terms of accessibility as well. So we'll be able to give a lot more kind of oversight from the student perspective later on. So what we kind of want you to do for a minute is just think about your own teaching methods that we do at the moment. Is there something at the moment that you could be asking or transferring into something like a learning hub that you could have the students do? And it's this whole principle idea of, instead of, you know, the idea of passive learning, that we stand there, we talk at our students, they kind of retain the information, reflect on it. Can we actually be transferring that into, we are asking them to do something? So a lot of these ideas are the things that come up repeatedly over and over again, that we find ourselves, whether that be as a pack or whether as a lecturer, we have these conversations regularly with a whole range of students. But actually, can we draw some of this in and make a centralized activity which actually encapsulates this, to kind of cut back on those repeated conversations that we can signpost students to? So if you just use the chat, is there anything at the moment you think that you could actually possibly transfer from almost the passive talking to students to actually the active engagement? Yeah, so Paul's got an idea in here, is how to undertake a policy briefing. Lovely job. Has anyone else got any other ideas at all? And I think one of the main things within some of this is the idea that we do need students to see the value of the Learning Hub. So partly, obviously, with the certificates, we've got the whole motivational aspect behind this, but actually what underpins this is actually the students understanding the end goal. You know, while yes, it doesn't appear on their degree certificate, actually engaging in the Learning Hub will make them better learners, will make them better in engagement, which will hopefully in the end reflect in the grades they come overall. So how did we kind of start with the whole process? So much like Wendy and Vanna said, as a team, we very much came together and we kind of drew out the main instances and the main, you know, troubles we found and that our students had. But we also within this fed into ideas. What do we also want to embed in our students' learning and knowledge? What do we want to build on? What do we want to transform? So we started with a whole pool of ideas, and we considered really how can we change some of our existing teaching methods and materials into a new form, into this online platform, with the majority of the world currently moving in online in some way or shape. It makes a perfect time to kind of embed this. We know the majority of students are engaging in online activities much more. So actually it's a great time to start playing around with some of these tools. So embedded within this is this whole movement from the very much the passive learning to the active learning, from telling to doing. What we do know quite often from research is actually the doing allows students to engage at a higher level. So when we talk about passive learning, actually we're talking about traditional learning methods. Most of our students engaging in university and moving through the education system up to the point of university, most of them would have engaged in very much a passive learning system, very much the traditional, you are talked to, you reflect, and then you do an activity afterwards. And this is very much the traditional system that we've had for many of our learners. But what we do want to move this forward to is to develop that high level thinking and order in our students. And by doing this, we bring in the active approach. But what we must do is find a nice balance within this. So as we see the world has moved forward into online arena, we do also need to recognize that actually the passive way of learning is very much the dominant way of learning. You know, we passively take in information all the time, whether that be from the TV, from the news, from social media, from engaging, you know, in our phones, in text message, we're passively engaging the whole time. What we also need to recognize is actually basic things like reading stamina is actually decreasing. A lot of people, you know, the most they read in a day is probably maybe a Facebook status, a Twitter message. And actually by transferring and breaking down reading into smaller components, we're re-establishing some of these reading stamina back into our students, but we're also making it much more active and engaging. Because what we do know, if we think of something like social media for one instance, we have reading in chunks, but quite often there's activities within there, there's quizzes, there polls, and we're much more reflecting actually the wider world of the way it's working, and much more the world our students are embedded in as well. So actually, by breaking reading down, examples like here, we've got here the ideas of the long text. Actually, this helps in terms of widening participation in terms of students with additional needs. So actually, by giving these alternative mechanisms in doing active learning over passive learning is going to hit in terms of widening participation, in terms of additional students' needs as well, because actually we're taking away some of the pressure on the students to be able to read long reams of text at one time, but be able to disseminate, reflect, and be able to do something with that information to allow that high level thinking, to allow that to really embed in their work that they're moving forward. And this is kind of the whole principle that's really underpinning this now. So just as a general question, kind of bringing this to a close today, we just kind of wanted to see how everyone felt, you know, about the idea of the learning hubs, or even trying this. So we do just have a final poll, which is kind of just to see, you know, how do you feel about maybe implementing this in your course route? Or is this something that you feel like you might want to have a go of, or might want some more help with, or to have a look or play with? Just wait for that to do. Yep, so that's really good to see. Yeah, so the Bright Space, definitely recommend if you haven't got one, if you can get a sandbox, that definitely is the place to go and play in terms of Bright Space and make any errors in advance. But we have projected some ideas in terms of the Learning Hub, in terms of how we see, you know, the development of this moving forward, not just in terms of staff and students, but in terms of the institution overall as well. So particularly in terms of students, you know, this is really about, you know, academic achievement, skill building, employability. So it's very much this idea of our students, while they're with us, we're also scoping out for their future as well, because a lot of these resources that are created in the learning hubs will be reflected into future employment. So for us, a lot of our students will go on to work with children, for instance, and actually a lot of the courses now that they will go into in terms of employment, when you start off, we're talking about safeguarding courses, they will be very much similar to our DSE courses. They are online, they're interactive. By building this in will allow students to engage in courses in terms of employment much easier, because they're already familiar with the format, they're already familiar with how to engage, how to learn in that mechanism. So actually, this is very much about the trajectory of our students' experience. So not just the short term, but the long term, the longevity of them really moving forward, going through the university. We also want to see our students achieve. And actually, what we do know from a lot of research is actually these small incremental achievements of receiving certificates actually increase motivation in terms of students as well. So that constant reinforcement and positive reaffirmation allows students to develop much more confidence, to be able to go ahead and try hopefully new things, and be able to feel more confident in the work they are doing, which will make them much more resilient in the long term as well. And hopefully it will allow for a better study and life balance as well. We know a lot of our students, particularly, you know, around submission times, find it quite overwhelming, find it quite stressful. And again, they don't always know where to go. They don't always know who to speak to. They don't always necessarily know what to do with their stuff, the things that's really kind of, you know, holding them back. by having the learning hub, again, you know, as a pack, you can negotiate them to time management skills. You can negotiate them and show them, you know, where to go in the university because they've completed this. So it's giving them that underlying support and a mechanism that's not necessarily us standing there on week one and being like, this is the wellbeing team, this is the mental health team. Actually, it's embedded through their journey and it's constantly reiterated to them. So rather than you keep going back over the same points, they have this information continually fed through to them. But also in terms of impact on staff development as well, you know, peer-on-peer learning is a great place. You know, it's not only in terms of students developing our skills, as a team, we are highly developing our skills. I mean, Ivana is an absolute whiz on Brightspace. I'm sure there's nothing on there she can't do at the minute. But actually, in terms of ourselves, you know, we are developing as a team. It's really about sharing of good practice. And again, you know, sustainable resources means that in the future, you know, as of next year, this can just run out over and over again. There might be some tinkerings and bits and pieces that need to be done, but once it's made, it's there and moving forward. And in terms of institutional impact, you know, the biggest thing is, you know, we do recognise the widening participation of our students. So we are hitting a number of learning styles for our students' needs within this. Not only that, but again, it allows us to scaffold our students to give them support they need that might not be aware of where to go. So again, it's really, really about holding our students and allowing them to develop confidence within these learning hubs. And as I said before, it's very much aligned with a lot of the principles of PAC, that actually this is much about students taking ownership of their own work and their guided journey. And it allows us to signpost them and sit alongside their journey rather than necessarily pulling them along and physically taking them places and showing them where to go and what to do. You know, and again, it's about enhancing our students' development, which it reflects in the NSS scores. Sorry, just trying to get in with the time there. So any questions at all?
Thank you very much. We do have some questions in the chat. So one, and in the Q&A. So one question was about directing students differently depending on the years that they're in. So that's the idea, that over time we will develop activities that will be for each level and that we will be really building on each other. At the moment, we had some activities that we offered only to the level 4s because they were specific to the beginning of their university journey, and we have some activities that were specifically for the level 6s, and many activities we offered to everybody, just kind of to maximize our time, and to, it was new for everybody, and there were like referencing and academic writing that was useful for everyone. And in terms of the evaluation, we're planning to do 3 different focus groups with each level separately, so that we can see how that might benefit for the levels separately. Then we had a really nice comment about doing duplicate work with learning services and an offer from learning services to help us develop content. So that's amazing, guys. Yes, please help us develop content. And we are talking to, obviously, we are doing this evaluation project under KELT. So we're supporting by a KELT research project, research budget. And we are happy to work with the library services. And we are using the existing library services, converting them slightly into more interactive, and talking to the library and learning services about how to do this for the whole university, so that we can have more interactive academic skills, resources, and so on.
In response to Chris's point, I think although, you know, at a superficial level, it might feel like we are repeating or reduplicating some services, but actually the learning hubs are a conduit to this, to the learning services colleagues and the library, because as Ivana said, we are using some of those resources. We're pointing them to the LibGuides, we're pointing them to the careers team. But what we're also doing is we're more than highlighting the amazing professional services we have here already. We are actually linking. The learning hubs are the in between and linking directly the course to the professional services, and actually making it very clear to the students why it is relevant to them. So I think it enhances the services rather than duplicating.
And one of my ideas is that we will have some central activities that we can then add personalized videos to. So maybe different courses can have their own bits, and then we can have some more centralized bits as well, so that the students feel that it's their lecturers talking to them. Right. Yeah, great. So I think the best way for us was really to convert existing resources. So what I was showing you, for example, that was our colleague Palawi's idea that she was normally doing as a PowerPoint in a session, but we converted it into this online setup. So I think we need our expertise together and to work together to create something like this. Thank you very much for attending and for all of your questions and comments. And please do get in touch with us if you want to keep having the conversations.
Thank you very much, everyone.